In this video, I'm going to be modeling for you how we apply rounding strategies to word problems. So this is where rounding kind of becomes more real life, more real world. This is examples of when you would round in everyday life and how it's a life skill. So when you're reading word problems, when you read words that say about, around, and approximately, those are your clue words that you need to round, that they're not looking for an exact number, they're looking for an estimate. Also, another important idea to remember is that when we see these words and we know we need to round first, okay? Because that's the whole idea of rounding to begin with, is rounding makes numbers easier to work with. If you do all of the work with the more specific or exact numbers and then round, you've kind of done the opposite of what rounding is really there for you to do, and that's to make numbers easier to work with. So round first, then solve with your addition, your subtraction, or whatever operation it is. So I'm going to do two examples here where I'm going to show you that I'm going to be rounding first to find my estimate. So here's my first scenario, and the scenario is that on the day 1 of my vacation, I drove 267 miles. On day 2 of my vacation, I drove 194 miles. And then on day 3 of my vacation, I drove 34 miles. So my question is, about how many miles did I have to drive to get to my vacation destination? So because I heard that word about, I know I need to round. But before I do any rounding, I need to think, well, what am I doing with these numbers? Think about the math before you do the math. They're asking me how many miles I drove to get to my vacation. Well, I need to include all of these days. I didn't just drive on day 1. I drove on all of these days. So thinking about that makes me know that I need to add. I need to join my days together. So I'm going to write my equation with the actual numbers, and then I'm going to round them. I'm going to write my equation with the rounded numbers. Now, this is where you need to make a decision on what place value you want to round to. I could round all of these to the nearest 100. It would all work, but when I look closer, this number here, its nearest 100 is 0. So I would be saying I drove about 0 miles on the 3rd day of my trip, and that just really wouldn't be reasonable. So a better spot, a safer spot would be for me to round to the nearest 10 each time, because that way this one will still be included in my equation. So I could use my number lines if I'm still at that point, if I'm more successful with my number lines, or if I'm able to work mentally, that's great. I'm going to use whichever strategy I am successful with most of the time. So here, 267 is about 270 miles. 194 is about 190 miles. And 34 is about 30 miles. Again, if you need to use a number line, do that. Use the strategy that you're most successful with. Now I'm going to start by adding my ones, because ones make tens and tens make hundreds. So I want to start here. All of these are zeros, so 0 plus 0, 0, 0. Here, I'm going to notice that I can do 7 and 3 make a 10, and then 9 more is 19. And then here I have 2 plus 1 plus 1 is 4. So I drove about 490 miles on my vacation, or to get to my vacation. Here's another quick example. Here is there are 884 turtle nests, or turtle eggs in a nest, and 174 of them hatch. So my question is about how many eggs still need to hatch. So when I think about the math before I do the math, I realize that I have a group of turtle eggs, and some of them have hatched out, and I'm wondering about how many eggs are left over. So I see that a group is being separated, so that's my clue that there's subtraction going on. So I'm going to write my equation, 884 eggs, subtract the 174 that hatched, and that's going to help me find about how many eggs still need to be hatching. So I'm going to round. Now here, I could use the nearest 10 or the nearest 100. Both of these would be okay to do that. So I'm going to do the nearest 100 since I did the nearest 10 here. I'll do the nearest 100, practice both of them. So again, if you are successful rounding mentally, do that. If you're more successful rounding with the number line, do that. Use the strategy that's best for you. So 884 is about 900 eggs in that nest, and about 200 of them hatched. So that means when I'm subtracting, I start in my ones place again, and I have 0 minus 0, 0 tens minus 0 tens, 9 hundreds minus 2 hundreds, 9 minus 2 is 7. So there are about 700 eggs that still need to hatch. So these two examples are word problems that you might in real life have a conversation about. Oh, about 700 eggs still need to hatch. Oh, I drove about 490 miles. So remember, listen for these clue words: about, around, approximately, or estimate. That's another really good one. I'll add that here. That's another really good clue that you need to round. And then again, round first before you solve, because then you're actually using the goal of rounding to make numbers easier to work with. If I use these numbers, even though you might think, oh, those are easy numbers, it is a little bit more work. Here I only had to focus on one place value. The rest were placeholders. Here I only had to focus on 2 place values. The rest were placeholders. So remember these 2 strategies when you are working with rounding in word problems.